Hey guys, Robbie here from CrossFit South Bend. Today we are going to try to answer the question, are your genes your destiny from a health perspective? So I'll just be very quick with the answer here. The answer is no, but it's really interesting to understand the reasons why that's the case. So I think a lot of people are really under the misconception that your genetic history from your parents and your grandparents, so on and so forth, determines your health. And the truth is, for the overwhelming majority of health conditions, that's just absolutely not the case. If you read the scientific literature on the subject, if you talk to researchers about it, for the overwhelming majority of health conditions that we deal with today, specifically the ones that are chronic health conditions, things like heart disease or diabetes or autoimmunity, things like that, while there is definitely a genetic component, which we'll talk about, your genes do not determine your destiny. And this is a very important point, because if you adopt the attitude that, well, my dad had this, and then my grandfather had the same thing, so therefore I'm going to have it, well, then you just have this fatalistic attitude that says, no matter what, you're going to get it, when it's really just not true for the overwhelming majority of things. Now, let's talk about some, counterexamples here. So if someone has the genes, let's say, for sickle cell anemia, yeah, okay, well, then basically they have sickle cell anemia at that point. And there are other things as well. But for the overwhelming majority of things, again, like autoimmunity and diabetes and endometriosis and things like that, your genes are not your destiny. So what are some helpful ways to think about the way this works? Well, here are a couple analogies that I like. Your genes are like the keys on a piano, but the way they get expressed is the way they get played, the music that's played on them. So while the keys are fixed, you can play the keys in a number of different ways. Or another way to think about it is as a script for a play. There's a set script that is written by the playwright, of course, but then how it's performed is very different depending on the company that's performing it. So similarly with our genes, we do have a fixed set of genes, but there's a whole area of research called epigenetics, which investigates the extent to which our genes are turned on and off by environmental triggers. So here's an example. Someone may, for example, have an autoimmune disease, say Hashimoto's thyroiditis, autoimmune hypothyroidism that runs in their family. But that gene by itself does not automatically mean that they are going to get Hashimoto's thyroiditis, let's say if their mom had it or grandma had it too. It could mean that there's a genetic predisposition to get it given certain environmental influences, like a nutrient-poor diet, or chronic stress, or lack of exercise, or very poor sleep. Given all those environmental conditions, then, that paired with the genetic predisposition, that's going to mean that it's very likely that this person gets it. But the genetic predisposition by itself is just a very small part of the equation. And there are different thoughts about how much of a role it plays. But the top researchers, particularly on autoimmunity, will tell you at most it's about 33% of the equation. That's a big deal, because that means the other 66% ends up being what we do. It's within our control. It didn't have to be that way. The ratios could have been reversed, and that would have not been so great. So one of the reasons I'm so passionate about, what we try to do here with nutrition coaching and functional diagnostic nutrition is that there really is this element of things that can be done to help people who have genetic predispositions but who don't want to go down that route of, basically dealing with their parents and grandparents dealt with. Another way to put this, that's probably one of my favorite ways to put it, is genes load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. So what are some environmental triggers that basically determine whether a gene is going to express itself or not? Again, diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, or your exposure to stress on a daily basis. All of these things, environmental toxins, all of these things are going to determine the extent to which certain genes get turned on or turned off. So someone might have the gene for Alzheimer's, let's say. ApoE4 is a famous gene that's studied both for high cholesterol and for Alzheimer's risk. But even with something like ApoE4, you know, the vast majority of people who have ApoE4 only have one copy. And while that increases your risk, it doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's. Even if you have two copies, it doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's. It means your risk is greatly increased, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to get Alzheimer's. So it's very, very, very important to remember this. And again, people will always say, well, I'm getting this thing because it's my age or because my grandparents and my parents had it. A lot of times what's common to the parents and the grandparents isn't just the genetics, but the environmental circumstances. What sort of stressful lives do they lead? What sort of diet are they consuming? Do they have the same poor sleep habits? So we confuse genetics with environmental influence, and it has this sort of fatalistic effect. So if I could leave you with one idea today, genes are not our destiny from a health perspective, and there's a lot you can do to keep yourself healthy, even if you have genes that predispose you to a particular health condition. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.